Good evening, everyone. Welcome again. Another webinar with football courses. We've got another guest, Ben Lyon, today. Welcome, Ben. It's great to have you on board with us. Pleasure. And thanks for sharing your knowledge. And just basically, we had a couple of conversations before you accepted and we accepted, and we had a couple of really good conversations. It's a really interesting topic about social and mental corner in football, which I'm really looking forward to. And here we go. Ben, mic is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Thank you, Emil, for the opportunity to share a little of what I do and have been doing with everybody. The focus is on the mental side of the game today. Ultimately, I now run a company called Insight, but I've got a history in education and more recently in football, but I'll share that in a moment. But the kind of mantra is we didn't fix behaviour, we decoded mindset. We train the player and the person, and that's born out of my experiences, which I hope I can share a little of today. In terms of my experience and where this came from, primarily I'm a senior school leader with a track record over 30 years of transforming behaviour, culture and outcomes in challenging contexts, largely in secondary schools, but also in pupil referral units and across trusts. As a deputy head teacher, I've reduced exclusions, strengthened inclusion and raised attainment, basically through relational research-driven approaches. I developed insight whilst within schools to decode the why behind behaviour and equip teachers with strategies that built safety, belonging and motivation. And in that primary world that I work, my work has been recognised by Ofsted and more importantly by the lives of the young people whose learning and confidence were restored. Now, there's a book that I sort of live by and I'll refer to by Simon Sinek, and it says we'll start with why. So I just want to briefly start with an anecdote, which I think gives some context to why we have to find that hidden child. And the example that I want to refer to is a young man called Frankie. I was working in a school a couple of years ago as a behavioural consultant, and I was called to a classroom. Within this classroom, as is often the case, there was a young man having a bit of a meltdown, digging his heels in. A very small child in year 7, a young man called Frankie, and he wasn't doing what the teacher wanted, and the teacher had called me to remove Frankie. And I went to deal with it, and I won't deal too much with how we calmed Frankie down and what have you, because that's not the sort of central focus today. But Frankie, fair enough, had his hands gripping the table. And it took about 10 minutes to sort of coax Frankie out of the room and along to my office where we had a conversation. And when we'd calmed down, we were just asking some pretty basic questions. And eventually we got to some that became quite telling. And I just asked him, were you the only person who was misbehaving in that room? And he went, hell no. And he was very keen to point out that Sarah hadn't opened her book yet, and Mark over there hadn't written anything, and Paul over here has only been flicking Raj's ears the entire time, and the teacher hasn't picked that up. And then we went a little further, and we tried to find out why it was that he had his breakdown. And he said, I was just trying to copy down what was on the slide. It was a science lesson, and he kept moving the slide on before I'd finished. And he found that quite frustrating, Frankie. And he said, hell yeah. His language was more colourful than that, but nonetheless. I said, do you mind, Frankie? Who do you live with at home? And we talked about that for a while. And I said, just out of interest, what happens if you're playing board games and whatever, and time runs out and you have to finish? He said, no, sorry, that's not okay at all. And he nearly got agitated again. I said, just out of interest, when you're in your room on your computer and your mum calls you down for dinner, if you're halfway through a game, what happened? No. And we got there. And I said, do you mind if I call your mum? And we're going to have a meeting so we can see if we can get to the bottom of how teachers could maybe help you a bit more. And by then we'd made some progress, and he said, okay. So we met with mum the next day and Frankie, and we asked similar questions again. And she said, no, he can't be coming down if he's halfway through his game. He can't leave that game. And we went through 2 or 3 different scenarios. And then I just asked what the last thing he says to her was before he goes to school. And they looked a little confused, and they weren't quite sure what to answer. And I said, "Do you mind if I ask you if he tells you he's going to be good today?" And he went, "Oh, I do. Yeah, I'd always say I'm going to be good today." And she went, "Yeah, he always does." And I said, the issue is that Frankie's got really high levels of perfectionism, and not many people can see it. And the thing is, he makes you a promise in the morning when he leaves. And the moment he gets even a warning in a classroom, he's broken that promise. And there were tears, and we were able to design a plan, and we were able to give better advice to teachers about why Frankie was so obsessed. And we were able to reframe that as just try and do your best, Frankie. It's all I ask. And that led to some significant improvements for Frankie. And the reason I do that is because, as Simon Sinek says, we should start with why. But the thing is, it's not just Frankie, it's everyone. Everybody has their own attributes, and they're actually behind a screen of behaviors that we present. And the idea that we know that to be true intuitively and through our own experiences, and are willing to do it potentially blindfolded without finding out about it, that would be unacceptable. And so, my intention today is to share some approaches beyond the behaviors that people present, and to try and understand behind that so that we might best meet their needs. Now, in terms of football, my experience is shorter, although I've always followed it and played it and what have you. It's like 7 years of coaching I've been doing. And I'm a grassroots coach, and I've been lucky enough to teach at a club, Ryan FC, that have some very competitive teams through them, and ours have been amongst the most competitive. We've won multiple league titles, we've won multiple county championships and champion of champions titles, and often we've done so against stronger opposition, which I'll refer to a little later. I've been proud enough to support 19 players into academy football across the 7 years, many of whom actually had been in academies, came back out and needed to be kind of restored and repaired a little before they were able to showcase their talents and get further opportunities. And this in particular experience is what's inspired Insight the Mental Game, which is this football aspect of the wider work that I do. And it applies behavioural science and sports psychology to unlock performance and protect well-being as well. Hello. Sorry, was there a question?
No, just carry on. I just mean
Yes,
questions will be after. No problem.
Yeah, fine, that's fine. Okay. My philosophy is simple. Football is as much a mental and as it is a physical game, and that mindset is the true game changer. Now, in terms of the research and theory behind that, there are countless scores of books and articles that I've worked my way through over 30 years to get to this point. But there's a few that I want to refer to from the educational world, and others that you may be even more familiar with in the sporting world. The first of these in the top left here is self-determination theory. This is from Deci and Ryan, who developed it in the late 70s. And it's the idea that everybody's needs are met when we address their competence, their relatedness, and their autonomy. And by competence, we're talking about their ability to do things and their perception that they can do things. Their relatedness is their connection with what's going on and relevance to themselves, and their autonomy is that development of choice, not necessarily over the session plan that you've got. As long as they can see that it aligns with their goals, then that's fine. But developing that autonomy, if you do those three things, then the science dictates and defines that actually most people are satisfied and happy. In the bottom left hand of your screen, you'll see a chart, and this refers to the work Invisible Learning of John Hattie, and he's gathered meta-analyses across 900 plus different approaches and studies into what things really make a difference in terms of cognitive engagement and effective instruction. Carol Dweck crosses many fields, largely in education, but goes much further than that, and that's the idea of growth mindsets and what have you. But on the sort of middle and right hand side, we've got Steve Sallis, who's a sporting mindset coach, and we've got Dan Abrahams, who's sports psychology work on LinkedIn and beyond is really, really super impressive. But Michael Calvin's No Hunger in Paradise book was pretty inspirational to me. And there's a story in the middle of that relating to Kieran Bywater, who, when he was 21 years old, having had to come up through the academy in West Ham and been released and was trying to get in and out of different clubs, found himself in a field. And 15 minutes into a game that was supposed to showcase him a new opportunity, he just stopped, walked to the side of the pitch, collapsed on his knees and broke down in tears. And it's his father who brought that story, Simon Bywater, brought that story to light. And in many respects, it sparked Michael Calvin's work on No Hunger in Paradise. But it's always the story that people come back to. And I've been lucky enough to be talking to Simon Bywater quite closely through this project, and I'll come back to him a little later on. But in terms of other work, I would also refer to The Athlete Within by Kate Allgood. And what I've done is I've put the concepts which she thinks make the biggest difference to successful athletes, and I've aligned them with the attributes that my work in Insight looks at. For example, I won't read them all at you, you've got them in front of you, but when we're talking about resilience on that left-hand side, we specifically measure hopelessness and low self-efficacy, which we all have to one degree or another, but if it's more pronounced, it needs attention if you're going to develop resilience. If you're looking at reframing failure, which she targets, I would suggest that in our work we look at perfectionism, fear of failure, and self-handicapping. And when we're looking at motivation alignment, that's that balance between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. All of the things on the right hand side we measure in all of our young players and in the wider world as well, in education and beyond, through the studies and surveys that we do. And then based on that template and picture, we design ways of approaching the needs of the athletes. So I just also wanted to draw your attention to two specific sporting examples and one wider work from Simon Sinek. The first of which is Novak Djokovic, and I think it's really interesting how he responds when somebody talks about his strength and resilience as a gift. So I hope this comes across. Okay, it's not going to play, but then save it. But ultimately, he's suggesting that no, it's coming. Here it comes. Right, no, that's not going to work. So we will move beyond it and just click on through. It would appear that that's sort of just frozen out. So just checking, yes. So we're back on. So in terms of this, I've got some testimonials from players. Fundamentally, on the left-hand side, what I would have shown you is a short clip from Desmond, who's now at Wolves, who had been released by Spurs before coming to me. And now he's been at Wolves for 2 years. He's playing a couple of years up. He's absolutely smashing it. On the right-hand side is Miguel, who's over at Cambridge. And the gentleman in the middle is the father of a goalkeeper we had for 2 or 3 years, who was in and out of trials a lot of the time. Lovely lad and tremendous player in many respects. But fundamentally, what they were doing was they were saying that they were challenged, but they felt very, very comfortable throughout the whole thing. And the art there is to not remove their goals, but to see through the goals and look at the practice and the procedures that you're doing. Because if you take your goals into training too much, then perfectionism dictates that it all becomes about winning, when actually you should be looking at the processes and the mastery that you're taking part in, you're really trying to develop. In terms of where we go thereafter, just making sure that we go on. I now just want to talk to you a little bit about the sort of methodology of insight. Fundamentally, insight is a concept based around seeing the hidden person behind behaviors, but the methodology of insight is to get players to complete a survey, and it's a psychometric survey based on psychometric tests all the way through social work, crime prevention, education, sport, and what have you. And it's been tailored for football, and there's 60 questions, quick answers on a Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And some are positively marked, some are negatively marked. The participant doesn't particularly know which way that is. They're not trick questions, but logically they're in random order so that you can't quite see what you're being asked. And this takes them about 10 minutes, maximum 15, because it's a quick online click through. From that, a profile is produced, and automatically some strategies are proposed. But fundamentally, what happens is that their responses are compared to the norm responses of thousands and thousands and thousands of participants, so that we can look at scores that may appear low, but relative to the norm are still quite high for avoidance or for self-handicapping. And when we see those results, we know that we can do things to help and intervene. And so, what I want to do at this stage is target some of the attributes which come out, which we try and affect, and talk about some of the strategies that we use. And once I've gone through those, I want to share a couple of different levels, one team level, one individual level, of what that means in practice, and the outcomes of taking that particular approach. So one of the things that we find when we're looking at young people and adults, by the way, but and when they're doing these, is that we measure their hopelessness, and by hopelessness, um, what we need to understand is hopelessness is not just the belief that you can't do it today; it's the belief that you never will be able to do it. Now, in wider sense, that can mean that you are also depressed, but it could be that it's because of your alignment to certain goals. But nonetheless, hopelessness is the deep belief that you literally will not be able to do it today or next week or the week after. Okay. When we see it in practice, doesn't have to be through a survey, but nonetheless, when we see it in practice, this tends to present itself as slumps in body language after making mistakes, a kind of what's the point attitude in training, or withdrawal after being dropped or released from academies, which obviously I've encountered quite a bit. You see the boys come, and there's no doubt about it, their confidence has been knocked. Now, in terms of hopelessness, we have to understand that we need a multifaceted approach to responding to that. So, on the left hand side, we have strategies that we can use and do use. In the middle, we have the basic explanation of why that makes a difference. And then on the right is an example of what that might look like. Now, there's no suggestion in any way, shape, or form, especially with a room full of coaches, that I'm suggesting that how to apply is limited to the examples used here, but they're illustrative. Now, if somebody has hopelessness, it's really important that we give them small success targets. They need to be significant and matter, but they have to be small and achievable. And what that does is it reduces the overwhelm. It helps you build momentum. Not only are you building momentum, what you are doing is you're beginning to prove it is possible. And by doing that, you can then start to build in the larger goals. And so you might say complete 3 passes under pressure instead of control the whole game. In terms of replaying positive clips, you may or may not have access to VOs and what have you. But the critical point is that just telling someone with hopelessness they can is very unlikely to be effective, and it's quite unlikely to be believed. You need to show them that they can because they did. And if you are able to capture that, either by praising it straight away or by showing them a moment when they did, it becomes difficult for them to actually hold on to the fact they couldn't. And therefore, using the video, is one particularly powerful way of doing it. You could scaffold adversity training. In other words, you build resilience through structured challenge, and you do that by adding the resistance gradually. So you might add an extra defender in certain drills or practices, but you might do it slowly in the example when you know you're dealing with somebody with hopelessness rather than all at once. Okay. Now, the other thing that we can use is something we refer to as vicarious success. And this is when you use a peer who overcame the same barrier and you spotlight those. So, capturing the moment when somebody else broke through a barrier. What's really important is we don't fall into the trap of using the captain or the centre forward or the star player. Getting Michael Jordan to show you can do a layup simply makes everybody say, yes, I know Michael Jordan can do a layup. The point is using someone who might not ordinarily have overcome uh, a particular challenge, or is less obvious at least. That's quite a powerful way of breaking through hopelessness. And the other one is, you know what you're going to want to be able to call upon later. You know you want to be able to refer to their successes. So when you see them, praise them, stick a flag in them so that the week after that, you can come back. Remember that moment when you didn't think you could, but you did manage to beat the winger and get the cross in. You get that moment and you deliberately sow that in. Similar to hopelessness, but slightly different, is low self-efficacy. And this is when they have doubts they could influence a match, or they're hesitant in 50-50 duels. They don't like taking responsibility, but it tends to be focused on particular aspects of the game. And again, these strategies of step-by-step drill progression, effort praise over outcome, safe first touch repetitions, and again, the vicarious success are in there. But they're very similar to hopelessness. But one of the critical differences is that low self-efficacy is not the same as global hopelessness. In that respect, it's slightly less worrying on a psychological level. But nonetheless, we still have to recognize it, and we can't just forget it, because next time that same challenge comes up, it may be that weakness is still there. Okay. So a classic example is effort and praise over outcome, which validates bravery to try, not just to succeed. And you praise the great decision to attempt the pass. You sort of disconnect it from whether the pass was successful. Great if it was. Now I'll come back to this, but this is where having clear objectives in your sessions anyway is so important. Because if we're not careful, and I appreciate the level of coaches that I'm likely to be talking to here, so it may seem like teaching grandma to suck eggs, but I'm talking specifically in terms of affecting these particular attributes. Clear session objectives are perhaps obvious, but we need to recognize the cost of not having clear session objectives, and even more particularly, lazily drifting into still praising the amazing goal at the far post, or the dribble, or the pace, or the physicality, detracts from all your efforts to make sure that the timing of the run into the box was the focus today. And it undermines any effort to try and praise effort over outcome with these lads here. So allowing those obvious sort of always get praise moments to take over your attention can have a real cost when you've got people with low self-efficacy in a session. Self-handicapping, the one where they're creating the barriers themselves a lot of the time. Now, this often presents itself in a variety of ways, but it can be as simple as joking about not trying before a drill or a game. They don't warm up properly, and then they blame that because they got tired, or they get a pull of a muscle or whatever, or they hide behind excuses that their kit's not right, they're fatigued, the pitch is not great. And a lot of the time we need to understand that, as annoying as that can be from our point of view, it's our responsibility to make the changes on their behalf. And a lot of the time they're trying to avoid the accountability for failure. And if they would rather fail by naughtiness or by being ill prepared than fail for the performance, because that would really hurt them. And so, again, our approaches need to be things like non negotiable drill starters, which reduce the ability to avoid, mandatory first touch drills at the start of the session, for example, peer demonstration, where you get a peer to demonstrate because that makes it harder for them to pretend that it couldn't be achieved. Goal setting and then checking in stops drift. So making micro targets and little mid checks. So, I'd like you to get at least 3 touches in the first 5 minutes. See what you can do. And well done. Well, you only got 2. What could you do to get the third? Again, that idea of creating the deliberate success memories, celebrating the first time they break the avoidance pattern. Okay, um, and that was fantastic. Or well done, you stepped in last week to help. Those moments are really important. Now, perfectionism, to one degree or another, is one of the biggest challenges that we have. It's one of our biggest enemies, but it's also what we kind of demand of ourselves and them all the time in sport, especially at the most competitive end. And therefore, it becomes really challenging sometimes as a coach to see it as a flaw and to critique it. But when we're talking about perfection, and we're not talking about high aspirations per se, or the ability, the desire to win or do the best they can, it's the idea here that you have set only perfection as acceptable. And that was the idea I referred to behaviourally with Frankie earlier, where he made a promise that mummy wouldn't be naughty all day. But these players get upset at the tiniest of mistakes. They're reluctant to try new skills in matches because they'd rather stick to what they know. They don't want to be less good at the next bit. And these are the same players who sometimes put glass ceilings on their development because they stop taking creative risks. They will often be the players who start strong, sometimes with physical advantages, and by the age of 13 and 14, they become that midfielder who goes sideways and backwards and wants to retain possession. And there was a time where that was praised, so they'll cling on that. And the truth is, you now want them to break the lines. You want them to be progressive. You want them to find the forward pass. But that's risky, and that involves sometimes getting it wrong. And when you have that, that becomes a massive problem within sport. We also see, and I'll talk about this in a moment, a really strong correlation in sports people and high performing sports people between perfectionism and hopelessness. And we see it a lot with people in the first 6 months in the academy system. So we've done this profiling within the academy system, largely for people we had relationships with from grassroots before. But ultimately, that belief that only the best is good enough goes hand in hand with the reality that that's not actually achievable. And so hopelessness is really quite marked, and you see it a lot with boys in and out of academies as well. But when you're dealing with this, you have to deal with challenge zones. You have to deal with video mistake repair. You have to tackle it. You have to be willing to look at the best imperfect moments in training. So, what were the things that didn't work today but were the bravest? What were the ones we loved what they tried? What were the moments where somebody stepped out of their comfort zone, and they're the things we praise. But equally, and I'll come back to this again, this is where we praise process. We try and encourage mastery rather than simply perfection or simply winning. And as Aristotle says, excellence is not an act; it's a habit. It's what we do every day. The truth is, we have to be true to that, close to all the time. We're allowed to motivate, we're allowed to encourage them to win, but at the same time, we need to balance that where more often than not, we're proud of their approach. We wanted to work on something today, and that was the thing that I love that you tried. And that's where we put our energies. In terms of discounting and distortion, I don't think anybody who ever deals with young people, and particularly teenagers, would ever struggle to recognise. But this is the tendency for young people to dismiss, twist, or distort supportive feedback into something negative or self-defeating. Now, again, one of the things we test in our profiling is how notable this is in certain individuals. And it doesn't have to be the surly teen. It can simply be that they don't believe you. But I think there are two really strong things that we need to bear in mind. A lot of discounting and distortion has a really, really powerful root, and we'll deal with some famous footballers shortly, potentially who we know that's been the case. Some of our children have been through some pretty tough realities out there, and the children on the football pitch are the same ones in schools, and they're the same ones in PRUs. Some of them had really difficult childhoods; they still do, and we need to be aware that one group of people who don't want to listen to this feedback, if you stare at them for too long and you're still staring, waiting for their response, they're looking at you. Are you asking me to love you? Which is a really powerful way of wording it and possibly a little uncomfortable to hear. But the longer you look waiting for a smile back, you are actually getting nearer and nearer to two fingers up at yourself with some of our children. I think possibly more common is the incompatibility of the language that we use with what they have been used to. And I think for those of you who work in academy football, I think we must be very careful to recognise sometimes academy football gets a bad press when in actual fact there's some outstanding practice, of course, in there, including how to look after young people. But when these young players have been playing in grassroots and they've been scoring 5 or 6 goals every week, and they've been the man of the match every week or second week, and they have been the star, and everybody talks to them about how amazing they've been because they won, because they did this, that, and the other. And they go into the Arsenal Academy, the Portsmouth Academy, the Wolves Academy, and they spend a good 3-4 months getting themselves to the level of the other boys. And the coaches are saying, great effort, like what you would give an attention to, all this good practice. We need to be aware a lot of the time they just hear, so you're just saying, oh, I'm SH1T, aren't you? That's just you patronising me. And it's not what you're trying to do. You're trying all the right things, but we must get through that. If we know that that's there, and it's there for all people to a certain extent, but if in teenagers it's particularly pronounced, and when people are taking steps in levels, they're very conscious of it. This can really block progress and turn praise into pressure, advice into criticism. And so, on that basis, we really need some clear strategies. We need to remove the stage, take them to one side, make sure that it's not misinterpreted, make sure there's not the extra pressure of the social, uh, how it's being received by peers. Is it public or not? Take them to one side if you're going to give feedback. We need to deal with hard evidence. Don't just talk to them about your views. Show them concrete. Give them next step feedbacks. Have predictable language routines so that there's less room for misreading of intentions. Right. So this is where I talk about the targets we had. I like that you did this. This was something that I felt needed work. That's what I want you to do next time. Just go straight to it. The more you waffle in their eyes, the more you are drifting. They think you're struggling with truth sometimes, and that's really hard because it's a very human thing to hang on the response of a face that you're talking to. Some people you just need to barely make eye contact with. Just politely tell them what it is. That's what I did. Love that you did that. Let's look at that next and move on. And you do need to capture, just like with the other elements, you need to use vicarious success of the appropriate peers, and you need to build those deliberate success memories. Now, when you're doing that, you specific, no, not I remember that you've been good. You have to say, remember last session, we froze the drill to highlight your pressing. You have to be really on it because there's no room for misinterpreting, and they know that that's true. I do think I mentioned before, but it's really worth bearing in mind that hopelessness and perfectionism go hand in hand. Now, hopelessness can have many sources, but perfectionism can cause it. And it's very common in boys who've established that they want to be a footballer, for example, um, because they also kind of in their head know, and they're certainly told by many people how close to impossible that is. They may or may not know that 0.1% ish of people going into academies are still going to be footballers by the time they're 21, 22, but they get the sense of it. And as much as we try and keep feet on the ground, what we're effectively doing is here's your goals, but it's not going to happen. And that can manifest itself every day on the pitch as well. So if we want to avoid the negative spiral of I'll never get this right, perfect, so why try? And the withdrawal and the stopping of taking risks, we need to reframe our success criteria, set goals based on effort and growth. Did you attempt the new skill, not perfection? We need to build visible progression boards showing them the step forwards that they've already made. We need to deliberately make drills where errors are inevitable, and therefore not to be scared of, because no one could quite get this right. Things like getting a number of touches in an overcrowded area, but nonetheless you're still developing the skill and the quick movement and the what have you. But we know that's going to go wrong a lot. They know it's going to go wrong, and you kind of build that failure's okay in this moment. Um, we go from you must to let's try, or so what's the next step if that didn't quite work. And we always try and finish sessions with something that they can succeed at, locking in that belief. So you're flagging those success moments, again, making sure that they don't lose sight of it as they go. Again, it has to be what you live by, if not every day, the majority of the time, if it's going to be believed. Now, just briefly refer to mastery, and I'm not going to read everything at you, but at the same time, um, we are trying to engender mastery, and we're lucky enough to encounter it a lot. The idea here is that we need to make sure that is also fueled. So, what does it look like? Well, mastery is when the players keep working on a skill even after repeated mistakes. Um, by mastery, we're talking about what they're driven and what their goals are like. Curiosity, they ask how they could improve their first touch, or what's another way to press. The risk taking, they're willing to try new moves or tactics in training, even if it might fail. They've got that intrinsic drive to do a little bit more than they had to do. They take your advice and they put it into action, and you can see that's what they've tried. And some of them, even, you can see they come to the next session trying to do what you do. Okay, and that progression focus that they have, where they're looking at themselves versus themselves the week before, rather than am I better than him or her. Well, when you see those things, you're in a good place, because mastery is what's driving them. And for those ones, you need a different set of foci, where you look at process orientated objectives. You celebrate their effort and progress. You use individual mastery challenges. They're the ones where during a session, you don't stop the session, but you take them to one side and you say, I'd like the next 5 minutes to just be with your left foot, type thing. Individual mastery challenges, you then reframe mistakes as data, removing the fear of failure, encouraging risk taking. You treat errors as learning signals. So you ask, what did you learn from that mispass, instead of criticizing it? You'll notice this pattern. Vicarious success highlights players who've improved through effort. Let them demonstrate their skills to inspire their teammates, and you gamify improvement. You track juggling totals, sprint times, passing streaks. You celebrate personal best as much as wins across and against each other. All of these things encourage mastery, and there are about 9 or 10 other things that we look at. But as far as these ones are concerned, hopefully you noticed that they're not contradictory, and actually all of them would work with each other. It's just we need to know who we're dealing with and how it is we meet their needs particularly. So what do we do? So about 15 years ago, I developed this within schools. About 6 years ago, I adapted it, and this is what it looked like. First of all, when we did these surveys, I initially had to do it manually. But what we did was we took the survey results in, and the psychometric tests in, and scored them, and then produced data comparing all these attributes to the norm for the team, the norm more globally across thousands of participants. And then we put broad advice underneath it. What we've been able to do now is make that automatic through the Insight package and platform. We're able to make it so that the moment that they finish their survey, the coaches get both a profile and suggested starter strategies, with various other elements that you can refresh and change as you go through. Now, in terms of the next two things that I just want to go through with you, I just want you to see what this looked like in practice. So I'm going to take one team example, and then I'll look at an individual example. for you. So the first example is the team that I lead. They're going into under 16 now, so we've had 7 years together. But under 13 and again last year at under 15, they came up against a physically dominant, title-winning side, and they had to face them twice in County Cup finals, and in one of those occasions, they then had to face them in the Champion of Champions finals. And to give you some context, the opposition, it doesn't matter who they are, it's not appropriate, but the point of the matter is that including the 3 defeats they had against us, they only lost 5 games in those 3 years. And they were physically strong, they were vocal, dominant, domineering, they were intimidating, as was the group they came with. And to make matters worse, they were hugely talented. And this was a challenge that I could see happening. I could see the route through the cup as we were going, and I could see where we might end up. And I could see 3 games from the final. Should we get there, we were likely to come up against this team. And we needed to make a conscious training decision based on the mindsets of the boys that they are, and the fact that our boys were also quite successful, and they were also used to winning. But if I were to lock into winning, as which I do, but I don't make the central focus of training anyway, for all the reasons that I've outlined. But that would be the exact wrong thing to do when you're coming up against a team that were so good at winning and vocal about it. Because the high stakes game you'd be playing was, if you're not in front within the first 15 minutes and they're in front, how are you going to have the resilience to cope and bounce and what have you? And so what we did from 8 weeks from the final is we went even further into this sort of mindset approach to our training. And we made sure that our training was carried out in adversity. We made sure that we celebrated process over outcomes. We went to great lengths to add process in many respects as our focus. We prioritized mastery and approach traits, and we blocked out all intimidation through practice of that never getting attention and not being the point. And as a result, our players carried no fear or pressure into the 2 London Cup finals, both of which went to penalty shootouts. And when they went to the penalty shootouts, I want to put in contrast this other side who came with the very sole focus of winning. We wanted to win as well, not pretending that was not the case. But because winning was the only point, and because winning was everything, when they were not winning, they began to over-muscle what they were doing. And they began to add too much. And they were carrying out challenges such as you see in the middle here, which remarkably were not sending off offences, but there could have been 6 or 7 occasions where they should have had players who were sent off. But nonetheless, going into the penalty shootout with that mentality of winning is the only way and over-muscling what you're doing was always going to lead to error. And on 2 occasions, it did. We have the under 13 London Cup final. They missed 2. And here we have the same outcome for the under 15. We won't carry the video on because I never did catch up with any of the players in either case. But the issue there, and I just want to show you what we did, was we knew that they were a very strong opposition. We knew that they were likely, in some respects, to be stronger than us in many respects. And although we do use VO prep and what have you, we went for 6, 7, 8 weeks before analysing videos and really drilling in on the threats that the opposition had in this top left corner. We have the idea that they had a long throw, and we had access to videos of games that were going on and feedback from opponents and what have you. But I went further than I would do in sharing these with the players and the parents. And that included noticing how they zoned themselves when it came to opposition set pieces and throw-ons, and that they would crowd areas of the pitch. And we determined that there would be a strategy. And our strategy was that we would meet them, and we would meet them on the field of battle, and we would square up, and we would win and attempt to win our challenges, but with the specific objective of always going back and round the challenge that they were doing. So the idea is we actually divided all of our training pitches into 9. We were only ever allowed to start in the very middle rectangle of that grid, and only when you had completed 3 passes were you allowed the privilege of breaking out from the square and using the whole pitch. And we did that repeatedly. It was a genuine strategy, and it was quite effective as it happens. And we did gain space from a strategic and tactical point of view. But by repeating it so often on the process, what we did was we really drilled in that we were turning up with a method. We were turning up with a strategy. We had a process. The process was the point. The process is what would win the day. And therefore, we did concede a goal. And when we did find that the opposition's, tails were up, and it genuinely didn't shake the boys. The boys just believed in the process, and they believed that they had been told a process would be the answer. And we drew the first game 1-1, and we won on penalties. In the under 15s, we drew 2-2. And we won on penalties. In between, we played them in the Champion of Champions, and we won very comfortably 2-0 because they just couldn't get the ball. We just kept going back and round. And all of this was the idea that we believed in a process, not just the winning. The other example that I just want to share with you is an individual example, and this is of one of the young men in the team here. This is him, 9 years old. In the garden as part of the 10,000 challenge for the NHS. What I think is really relevant here is that this young man at this stage was the youngest in his team. But as we went through, he is a late developer. And by the time we got to 14 and by the time we got to 15, he was now having to cope with the fact that some of the boys were 6 foot plus, had thighs, yay wide, and what have you. And physically, he just hadn't grown at all. And so we had someone who we really needed to focus on their mastery. We really needed to praise their tactical contribution to games. And we needed to ride the storm of the fact that there were going to be a lot of physical battles lost. As we went through a sort of tough 18 months, 2 years in that respect. And I just want to show you a brief clip of one particular game last year. We were 3-1 down with 10 minutes to go, playing a very good side over in northwest London. And this idea of being process-based, this idea of, I'm afraid you're not going to always win the physical challenges, I think is pretty illustrative, this clip, showing the faith that the others had in him and the faith that he still maintained in the role that skill and moving a ball could play. So we're in red. Now, the reality is that would have been very difficult for him to be the man in the middle, in the box there. But we put a lot of energy into praising the contribution that he could make by being quick with his feet, by moving the ball and what have you. And the team came to value that contribution as well. I mean, as it happens, as fate would have it, growth is beginning to happen. So luckily, the physicality is catching up for him. But again, 2 different things. Always about building process over simply outcome as a key to really moving people on. Now, we just get to click on. I just want to show you some of the things that automatically come out of the insight report. When we do the insight report, it automatically produces profiles of individuals. This is the profile of some elements of the report that emerged on that young man there. The first is a development area, and the program looks at what you should do in terms of targeted coaching approaches, in terms of balancing competitive drive with process-focused development, teaching pressure management for high-stakes situations. And it gives the coach some things to say and to avoid saying in terms of what you're dealing with. And then he had very high perfectionism, which obviously was an issue, particularly for anybody, but particularly if you were always going to find yourself short on that physical challenge. And that's where the program tells us, and we automatically see that we normalize mistakes through professional player examples and growth stories. We set good enough standards, and we teach pressure release techniques, and we give, again, things to say and not to say. When we come to look at that, we look at social comparison, because these are things that he had as strengths. And so the report will always highlight strengths, and to make sure you don't just focus on weaknesses, you build on those. And what is more, the coach will get a dashboard whereby they get this breakdown. They send the links to the players, and from that, they get a breakdown of their team according to all of them. And you'll notice the black lines are the average for all participants across thousands of cases, so that you can see approach quite high. Most people's is high, but that's even higher, and so on. And then for the team, that it's broken down, instantly giving the idea that there's certain approaches you can try, all of which, by the way, there's a refresh function to change it. But these suggestions are given. There's an individual report per player. Again, it just happens at the click of a button, showing key development areas, key strengths that you can leverage within sessions. Some examples there that correlate to what we were talking about earlier with hopelessness, approach, perfectionism, intrinsic motivation. And again, other attribute profile graphs can be done, and attributes are grouped to deal with motivation or self-efficacy and confidence as well. So the idea is a lot of data is given. But ultimately, as I come towards the end here, nudge theory teaches us that small changes in how we frame our choices lead to big behavioral shifts. And the idea here is that if we know that there are hidden attributes behind all of our players, surely it's not okay for us to not at least find out what they are. Otherwise, we're coaching blindfolded. And with nudge theory, if we could begin to open that conversation, if we could get people to look the other way, then we could transform the way that people approach their coaching. We don't have to in any way diminish or decry the wonderful work they're doing on all their practices, but can they see the players that they're actually dealing with? And so I want to come back to that story from No Hunger in Paradise. At the heart of it was the story of Kieran Bywater, and it was the Simon Bywater who wrote an article on the experience of his son. And I reached out to Simon to ask him to review what we were doing. And he said this. He said that sadly nothing seems to change in the game. A lot of talk by those in charge, but I turned my back on the game a number of years ago as it broke my heart watching my son's and many other young lads' journeys and how parents had to pick up the pieces. But he also did go on to say one of the major impacts I've seen lads coming out of academies is the sudden loss of identity and how difficult it can be to find purpose again. He said what Ben is building with Insight, the mental game, genuinely tackles that challenge in a practical and meaningful way. It's a refreshing, intelligent approach that can make a real difference, both in football and in supporting young people more broadly. Now, I'm sorry if that's egotistical to include, but when you're trying to do work that you have a passion for and you get it validated by someone you were moved by the story of in the first instance, that really is incredibly powerful to me anyway. I just really love to be able to take that understanding we've applied in education and we're beginning to apply in football to an even wider audience, really. Now, at this point, if I could hand over to just see if there's any questions, really.
There are plenty, to be honest. It was really good. Yeah, I've got plenty of questions in my head, but let me just read the ones which are in the chat, which we've got a lot. Yeah, just to summarize, for me, brilliant presentation. I still believe there is not enough mental and social corners from for corner module in English FA and any others as well. I mean, when I was doing the courses in Welsh FA, there's not a lot of focus on that education side of it, which I believe we all teachers as a coaches as well. So we need to understand all the processes. Basically, I know it will be probably you need to get another, you need to go to the university, etc., etc. But basically, the basics needs to be there, and you need to understand what to do, how to do, and recognize all that stuff which you just mentioned within the webinar. Which basically, when you're talking about different cases, I was got hitting in my head different stories with different players in the last 15 years, which is always not really simple and easy to understand them. So this question why, which you said about, it's really strong. I've got several stories about it, but I just don't want to say too much. But yeah, I just said to one of the coaches now on my A license, because he asked me, what do you think, like what you want to have as an outcome from that course, or what do you think in terms of the coaching skills, which one you want to target, basically, like personally. And I just said to him, to be honest, we all know the practices. We all know how the football is playing. We all know the details of the coaching. We all know how to receive the ball, how to pass the ball, how to dribble, we know how to teach that. And I just told him that, to be honest, if there's one thing which I want to know a bit more about, I said just how to deal with different characters, like how to basically get to the brain every single individual, because you always, as a coach, because of your character, because of your biases, because of your background, you're always going to miss 3 or 4 within your team, which you probably you don't get at all. And I've got that stories already in my head when I probably didn't connect with 4 or 5 players from the group of 20, because I basically couldn't. I don't know why. I just couldn't find the way to connect with them and maybe help them to progress. And within the academy system, just to touch base on what you just said, what I find really interesting is that when you go from one age group to another age group and you change in your coaches, if you will see the difference between player and the player, just because the different coach, different approach, different practices, and different contact, you can see the player at the under 15 level here, finishing the season being one of the top dogs in the team. Then he's going to transition to the 16 with a different coach, different approach, totally different person, and he's basically here.
Yeah.
And people saying, but it's still the same kid. I say, yeah, he's still the same kid, but the approach is different. Maybe he needs a bit of arm around, maybe a bit of support, maybe a bit of individual conversation, maybe belief. But now he's here, and it's the same player. It was 2 months difference. It's not 6 months. It's not 12 months. It's not 2 years. It's 2 months when basically he's been there, and he's now here. And it's so difficult environment in terms of the pressure. And then, of course, 15, 16 is a scholarship. It's close to PDP, professional football. So it's plenty.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I could just say on that 2 things,
Yeah.
there's a book in it's in the last 18 months. A guy called Paul Dix wrote it. When adults change, everything changes, and it is focused on the world of education, but it's true way beyond it. And you're quite right. Coaching is education, but I think the significance there is we put so much effort into playing in similar ways through clubs to try and develop common skill sets and tactical awareness and what have you. But we overlook the personality changes in the adults every time they go up. And we can know it and what have you. But I think by the time you pass it through the prism, that particularly in the academy system, you have a really finite amount of time with a lot of these boys, because they'll either progress beyond you or you won't keep them, because there's also a selection factor going on. Then actually it's the imperative to do it right and do right by them and give them fair lessons they can carry on with is all the greater. So I think that's a really powerful observation. Yeah.
Yeah, I can clearly see it even on last season, this season examples where we always asking players to be adaptable. And when I've had, let's say, my end of the season with them, I just said, guys, now is the next step. You need to be adaptable. You need to learn the other person on the other side, and you need to know what he's looking for from you to basically perform week in and week out. And it's not easy for the teenager. It's not easy, and I fully understand that. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. I've got a couple of questions based on the slides. So
Yeah.
we've got several questions from Gav. Thanks for questions, by the way. So the first one, I'll try to read it all. So it was about the Novak Djokovic. The first one was, everyone is and should be treated as an individual, with their thought being on Novak Djokovic and how we would react to his processes. Are there ways or differences when considering the influence of teammates in a game that is not individual? I think, and I mean, what ways can the individual reset? I'm sure reset will be wrong word, but occur when when they may be thought given or influences coming from that team environment. Um, Apologies that went so long. Just wanted to explain
No,
how
no, no. I think
I
I
might
could.
approach the question asking. That was from Gav. Yeah.
Yeah, no, cheers, Gav. I think this is really, really interesting. I think it's quite important that we recognise, and obviously there is a similarity with the world of education. You can still have, if I'm understanding this correctly, meeting the needs of individuals still has to sit alongside the needs of a team. I think from an insight point of view, the reason we give team um, analyses and strategies as well is that hopefully they encompass this. I think it's worth bearing in mind that those individual adaptations that you make for um, young players, they ought not to be contradictory to meeting everybody else's needs anyway. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. And there are still social um, acceptabilities that we have to bear in mind. So it is not okay that somebody, the adaptation for them means they have to take every free kick, corner, and penalty, otherwise they're devastated because that was the only way you can do it. That would be a crazy idea that would both destroy the game and upset teammates. It's not okay that they swear and holler in the middle of the pitch and in danger getting sent off, or are generally rude and unpleasant to people. Of course, those things still have to exist. But it could be that their feedback is personalized. It could be that you take them to one side. It could be that you set them targets for next time rather than dwell on the errors that they made. It could be that you feed that in. And we also need to recognize that we're not only talking about match day management or a single session management, we're talking about over a period of time. So those interventions, Djokovic talks about what is effectively trauma perceptive practice, but he's using it on himself. And that idea that when people get angry or frustrated, he's talking about he allows the emotion to come out, as we've all seen him do, scream or whatever, and then he recomposes himself afterwards. Now, obviously, some of that has to be within the rules of the game and what have you. But maybe you find the vehicle. Maybe it is the case that you are aware that maybe in the lower years it's time to let that player have 5 minutes on the sideline. Or maybe it's the time that you let them have their word at half time about what they think is going wrong or not. But I think it's a really important point. But I think where it seems most problematic is if you only think of it in the middle of a match. There are so many other times to meet an individual need than just from the sideline or just in a halftime team talk. You've got all the training. You've got ways you can talk to them outside as well, and set them different targets. You can reflect over weeks rather than individual moments. Um, I hope that goes some way towards what I understood by that question.
Right, we've got another one. Is there any measure of the difference in influence of collective and individual interaction? Is there an assumption that every person will respond in the same way if we were creating an ideal?
No, it's a very important question. I think it's worth bearing in mind that you and I sitting here, Emil, we still have hopelessness and low self-efficacy within us. And depending on the topic we're dealing with, it may be more pronounced. Likewise, mastery is not a permanent state, neither is social comparison, and what have you. So we may normally be very comfortable amongst people and them knowing what we're doing in our own environment, but you have to, and you're comfortable doing webinars and what have you. But if you were to be in front of 200 people talking in a church, suddenly that would change everything because your environment was different. There can be that. So I think, no, there isn't an ideal, although there are clearly certain attributes that we would be less likely to simply ignore, such as hopelessness. We would want to address that. Um, but I think we need to be aware that it's not for us to change and fix the children. It's for us to know about them and meet their profiles in the most intelligent and logical way that we can. The vast majority of the strategies we use are not contradictory or conflicting. They Meeting somebody's needs does not mean not meeting somebody else's. You'll notice how often a fair example of vicarious success comes up because it is a really effective strategy to prove something can be done. But if I could go back to another point, uh, more globally, even in session design, having clear objectives. If you want people to work on the timing of their run into a box, you can remove barriers by making sure the person crossing is someone who can actually cross. You can, those sorts of things, because that just ruined the entire drill. But one of the things we've got to be really careful of is that we still praise the timing of the run and not the towering header on third cross from the guy at the back post, because all anyone will remember is that. If we're going to say something is process based, we keep it to the process, what we're praising. But no, there is, apart from the fact that broadly speaking, we're playing a sport and we're trying to get better at it, and we are trying to get more skilled, and ultimately we hope as a goal that we win. Therefore, skills like approach and mastery and attributes we would like to encourage. There is no template that everybody has to be the same. Quite the opposite. It's just that we should adapt and know what we're dealing with in front of us. And that's the idea of the insight profiling that gives you that.
That's a good time to share my one story from last season, 2 seasons ago. So we've got a player in the academy who is basically been, I think, one of the most skillful player I've worked with. But basically, in terms of his behavior during the practices, during the sessions, he was always, how to say that, not ideal. So he was kind of like a maverick, and basically he was doing everything in his own way. So you can prepare the practices, you can prepare the session. He's gonna come destroy it. Basically, he will take the ball, he will smash it on the wall, he will smash it to the goal. He was do like really individual.
Mm.
He didn't care about the rest. He was just him, football and the pitch. That's it. And I really struggle. Basically, that was the moment when basically as a coach I was thinking, I don't know. I tried several ways. I spoke with several coaches from the top game, and I just asked them the same question. I just described his profile, how he behave in different situations, what he's doing, what is my problem. So he was basically destroying the sessions, the practices. He was showing that he's maybe bored a bit being there because he was basically the best one.
Mm-hmm.
Far, 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 far best from the rest. And I've got four. I asked four coaches, the four given four different answers, basically. Starting from get rid of him, da da da. Then maybe try to ask the question why, what's the background? Maybe get to know him a bit better in terms of his family background. why he's behaving in that way. Ask him the questions why he's doing this, for just as simple as that. Is he bored? Is it what is that coming from? So several different questions. I've got crazy amount of 1v1 conversation with him after sessions, trying to get into his head of he can't do that. Basically, it's like, I think the best description of him is like Balotelli. He was always doing his own thing on his own rules. There's no rules, those his rules. That's all. Basically, this player is now a Premier League player. He was with the Premier League club on the summer camp, and he gonna probably he will be registered in the Premier League soon. And I guess he gonna make a debut because he's basically far
Mm.
better than the others. But I still don't know if I have the someone similar in the next couple of months or weeks. I don't know. He was probably he was the most difficult player I've ever met in my coaching life.
I think, yeah, and that there's no point hiding it. That's challenging. I think that's the first thing to recognise, and I admire your fortitude and patience for trying to carry on because that's not easy. But it is the job, and it is our responsibility to do so. I think the complicating factor before we go into the case in point is that football is about levels, and if I took my teams to play your teams, you would almost certainly emerge victorious, and there would be an imbalance, despite the fact that my teams generally win, but they play at a level. And I deal with boys who come and they go, and some of them I have to advise that they would be better playing at a different level, and that's true on the way up and the way down. The version on the way up can often look uglier because they're effectively saying they're better than this environment, and that's quite challenging. I think it is, however, worth bearing in mind that the behaviours themselves will often be that he is, yes, he may need challenge, and yes, he may be frustrated, but would have been interesting to get a profile because he may have been scared if he's here for too long, will he be where he needs to be? He may have been wondering if he's valued enough to still be here. He may have benefited from roles that you would not normally trust him with, such as mentoring roles and leadership roles. And it may have gone well against the grain, but to invite him to contribute to designing the session the week after. And things where you kind of, it seems counterintuitive and it feels a bit like rewarding poor behavior as well. But at the same time, the complicating factor in sport is that it is about levels. And actually, I mean, you've said where he ends up, but we mustn't lose sight of the fact that that's relevant, um, even when it's not pleasantly presented. And so I do think that's a factor. But in terms of what we would draw out from an insight point of view, is the analysis would show a really, I would imagine, a really strong social comparison downward, we call it. But basically, you'd see social comparison, but ultimately he would be struggling to look left and right and find someone he respects. But in football, there's moments where you need to lead, and there's leadership roles, and those leadership roles may or may not come with an armband. And that can be about making key moments count. That can be about bringing people with you. That can be about Liverpool's high press only works, and more recently Thomas Frank's only works if the three people go at once and the four behind them cover the spaces. It doesn't work when one does it. And the dribble is fantastic, but you've just entered four other people's space. You've just collapsed our entire structure. And so those extra responsibilities and challenges could have been explored as well. But yeah, it's difficult because that behaviour comes and it probably still sits with you.
Yeah, I did experiment just basically on Wednesday when it was the first time with the age group which I've never seen before. Basically, first time in their life they saw me and I saw them. So it's not the easiest way. And then we played some really good clubs in the UK. And I've got one of the
Post about it.
sorry.
I think I saw the post. Was it a try
Yeah,
three-way talk?
yeah. But that was a really interesting case based on what you're just saying about giving the responsibility. There was one player who was basically trying to see where is my border.
Yeah.
He was trying to test me. They always trying, the kids. They're
Yeah.
always trying to see for how much you will give them. Where is the border for your behavior, for everything? So there was one particular player who was basically trying to really see where is my end.
Mm.
Um, and during the warm up, he was a bit off in terms of his, attitude, body language, and I'm like, oh my God. When I spoke with the coach about him, he said he really prized him as a good player. He's good
Mhm.
profile, this and that. And he was trying. I spoke with him saying, that's not on what you're doing right now. I said, if you want to do it, carry on, no problem. And I just observe him for a bit in terms of the warm up. And then once I had the 11 to put on the first game against Plymouth, and they asked me, who is the captain today? And just straight away in my head, I'm like, let's do it. And I said,
Yeah.
yeah, you will be the captain. And everyone was shocked because he'd never been a captain in this team. And I said, okay, so you're responsible today for the whole team. So you can go to the ref, have a chat in a huddle before the game, but you need to lead it. You're ready. And he was like shocked. I said, yes, I'm ready. I said, okay, off you go. And basically on the pitch, he was one of the best players in that game, in the first game. And that gave me as well that sometimes, of course, someone can say, oh, in a warm-up, he was basically going at him, showing that he's a poor example, because he was a poor example of how he approached warm-up, how he approached stuff, how he behaved and everything. And then somehow I prized him to give him an arband, but I just wanted to give him responsibilities to see how he react.
Yeah.
You're saying if you're a character, because you're showing some kind of character, show it there. Be responsible, trying to and
But
basically that was just my kind of intuition of let's do it. We'll see how it
I think,
goes.
by the way, that's brilliant. By the way, and it's great to see things have impact, albeit short-lived. Who knows whether it lasts? But the point is to be curious as to what's behind, and to try things, and to be adaptable, um, but to recognise that there's probably more than the behaviour you're seeing behind it. Um, and in that respect, I think the other thing worth bearing in mind is if any of this strikes a chord, it's because people know 95% of it intuitively. And excellent coaches like yourself, intuitively, it will strike a chord because it will remind you of your best moments. But if we could give the information to people early enough, we would give them an even greater chance to make better choices when trying to get the best out of players. I mean, the one that I always wonder, and you would see much more than I do, is how many good players have come in and left within the 6 to 8 weeks because they never quite got to the player behind. And 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, they're back to being a player in grassroots who's too good for grassroots. That one you would have much more experience than I would. But again, it's just our responsibility to try and
Yeah,
to arm people with information. I think.
hundreds of them in terms of 6 week trial. And we've got same conversation with one of the parents just most recently about the boy which we've got. And she just said that again, mental. So the boy is really good. I'm not saying not. He's really good physical profile, technicality is there, everything is there. But what I can see from him is just every single game he's got a really good start, a really good impact up to 40 minutes. Then basically suddenly he's just dropping. And my opinion, based on what I saw, is just basically maybe at the grassroots level he didn't have that intensity at all in terms of the game, in terms of the sessions, understanding that what's going on, etc., etc. So he needs to process everything. So the short term for him, 25, 35 minutes for his full focus on what he's doing is okay. But then in the longer distance, up to 80, he's basically every second half of the game, he's just basically one of the pros on the pitch. But at the start, he's one of the best. And the conversation is now, should we keep him? Should we not keep him? And I said, basically, what I said to them, it's just my opinion. Like, we need to be patient with him because basically, if he's showing you, even for the first half of what he's doing and his capabilities, he's smart, he's this and he's that. And then his mum said that he told her at home that he's a bit of struggle, that he knows he needs to be judged in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That could be a massive impact on what he's doing and how he's receiving the messages, how he's playing, how he's doing overall, because he's in a not mental state to show the best.
I'm going to speculate because I haven't met the boy and just
Yeah.
basically said I'm going to speculate that something. Perfectionism, it takes many forms, but particularly under the judgment that he feels he may be under.
Mhm.
It'd be interesting to find out what he believes the measures of success would be. And I wonder,
I think that could be a case because basically when we sub him off once, he went straight into tears
yeah,
straight
but
away.
are the measures only assists and goals,
Yeah, maybe.
for example? Because
Yeah.
maybe after 40 minutes, if that hasn't happened yet, he feels like his time is running out.
Because he is a striker, and basically at the grassroots level, as you said on one of the examples during the call, that he was always scoring goals, always, and
But
he couldn't score,
that's
and we sub
interesting,
him.
because if that's the only measure of success, that then there's perfectionism creating hopelessness again, because you've only created a measure, but whereas the process, the press, the space creation, the contribution to the ball play, the creation of chances, the getting onto it, it will come. All of those things. Unless you make those little micro targets and you break down the objectives, that's going to be there. The other thing is, of course, that um, football's a complicated game, so a simple game complicated only by the opposition trying to do the same thing. It is worth bearing in mind that in grassroots, he probably doesn't have opposition to adapt to the good things you do. So the higher you go up, I would like to think in our level, even at the top of grassroots, but certainly in academy football, half an hour you've been peeling off the centre half and running between the centre half and the fullback. After 35 minutes, if they're still letting that happen, that's quite poor on their part. You might need to adapt and try something different yourself. And I do wonder whether oppositions start reading and coaches are reading the danger he is presenting, and so you've got two different things there. I would imagine the goal
Yeah,
setting is the easier one to work on, but breaking the game into chunks with new targets, like, so what's the new challenge the opposition have given you? They've now switched who's marking you because you're quicker or whatever. Those
yeah,
little things, it's worth
yeah.
bearing in mind.
Yeah, it's so, yeah, it's so interesting. So yeah, I really like the webinar. I would like to see a bit more. I will be interested that the conversation probably on another day in terms
Yeah,
of how you measure and how you prepare all those profiles. That will be probably interesting. The question now will be to Unit Gav, Patrick, and Chris. If you have any other questions to Ben, you can unmute yourself now to ask the last question.
yeah.
And then we can wrap up because basically we're nearly hour and a half already.
Oh, sorry.
No, no, that's fine. It's no. That's why it's on Friday night, not on
Y-
Saturday and
Yeah.
Sunday.
Hi.
Come
Hi,
on, come
Ben.
on, Chris.
Hello.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I used to work in education as well, and I just wondered, in terms of the framework, in terms of neurodiversity and
Yes.
how that actually can filter in
Mhm.
to some of the work Insight does.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Chris. Obviously, I've worked for over 30 years in education and worked in places where we have inclusion units and we have autistic units and what have you. And I work alongside some experts in Australia on neurodiversity as well. I think that there's two things I think are really important. First of all, it's not a diagnosis. It's not to be understood as a diagnostic tool. It's a tool to gain an insight, literally, into the potential attributes that people have. I think we've got to be very careful because there are proper diagnostic routes for various elements of neurodiversity, and some of those are proper conditions that are lifelong, such as autism or ADHD or certain speech and language, developmental elements as well. However, working with the experts in the field, it's worth bearing in mind that your neurodiverse youngster or adult has attributes in the same way that everybody else has attributes, and none of the strategies per se are contradictory to meeting any of those needs. The vast majority of them are born out of trauma perceptive practice anyway. But if you're dealing with somebody with ADHD, and I would one of the slides I went through because of the time that we had. We've got Ravel Morrison, for example. He was at Manchester United, and we all know of him as a person who had a glittering career ahead, and it didn't quite make it. But the truth is, he had ADHD, and they didn't allow him to have his meds and what have you. And he also had adverse childhood experiences, which played a factor as well. But in all these cases, fundamentally, what is very inclusive is that you are trying to understand beyond the behaviours that there's someone there who we need to meet the needs of, and that includes all manner of neurodiverse pupils. One of the players in the clips that I would have given testimonials, who's now an academy, is a young man who has ADHD and has a really difficult time at school as well. And he was someone who was having academy experiences that weren't working out, and he's managed to get himself back in. But yeah, it's about understanding people as individuals as well. But it does certainly help create the environment where they can flourish, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's wrap up. Thank you so much. I really, really like it. I think I just need to speak with you a bit more about how you measure things. That would be interesting even to test it.
So all of those links are
okay.
to what are currently demos of what's becoming publicly available very, very quickly and soon. I'm particularly interested at getting more involvement into other grassroots teams, but academies as well, where I do perceive, but obviously I haven't experienced, but I perceive there's outstanding awareness of sports psychology, but it's not necessarily behavioural psychology. And I think the two can complement each other.
Yeah, as I said, that would be good. That would be good for me even to see what I've got within my group at the moment.
Yeah.
Even by the questionnaire which you talk about, to see which type we've got. And additionally, going forward for me now, I'm just thinking bigger picture now, will be good to see which types make it to the top, just long term, to see which one basically, which type of the profile in terms of the behavior is basically I don't say the biggest chances, but of course you're gonna have a couple of different wave paths and profiles in terms
the only
of
thing
that.
I'd say, and I'm conscious of your time, but the only thing I'd say is I think that's a natural curiosity, and I think it'd be really interesting, and I think it could be powerful. The only thing I would guard against is turning it against its purpose. The idea is it's for us to change and meet the needs of those in front of us.
Yeah, of course.
If we're not careful, we'll make it another filtering.
No. It
Like
will be just to understand and
yeah,
curiosity.
but no, I think
because
it would be interesting.
that might be probably that it's probably gonna show you something. I don't know what, but if you're gonna do the research, for example, for like a couple of years and see who's got the scholarship and who's got the professional contract, then you're probably gonna see which types going through the pipe, but maybe there will be the answer as why as well, because maybe we missed other ones because we don't want to deal with them, for example. Or we don't know how to deal with them. And that's why they will make it to the top. And we're just going with the ones which we're comfy with in terms of cooperation, coaching, teaching them and dealing with them on a daily basis. So yeah, very interesting.
Sorry, can I ask one more quick burning question?
Go on, Chris.
Yeah, it's just that we talk about young people, and we all know that the frontal cortex doesn't develop until such a later stage. And I just wondered how that actually impacts, for example, decision making. And is that kind of how does Insight kind of tackle that one in terms of, everyone's the brain development is going to be different. So, and that surely has to have an impact, just like the physical does, in terms of, for example, decision making or emotional regulation, etc.
No, absolutely. I think it's worth bearing in mind that what we're trying to do is understand the various attributes which contribute to engagement. And when it comes to the success of the longevity and the stickability of the learning that we're imparting. I think to a certain extent, this is primarily about making sure that we see behind the behaviours and we give people the best chance possible. I think it's still massively significant that we design our curriculums and our programs with real sensitive understanding about explicit instruction, and that our modelling is clear, and that we properly test for understanding before we move on through questioning and through observation. I think it's really important that we look at cognitive load when we're overburdening people and what they're taking on. But I think if you get that kind of three-dimensional design into your program, whereby you're looking at separate skills, you're integrating them into mini drills, and then you're putting them into game situations, and you do that on a regular and rotating basis, you give them the best chance possible. There are lots of things to do with development and the frontal cortex and the longer term learning of skills. It's not that it can't be answered, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that what Insight is trying to do is let us get to all of the children who all have those challenges and are trying to learn, by seeing through any of the emotional barriers between us.
Thank you. No
Cheers.
more questions.
Thank you, Chris.
That's fine. Right, let me stop recording.